feel like the greatest thing. So close.
Rebecca, you mute yourself if you want. I was gonna mute me, but that wouldn't help then, would it?
Yeah, exactly. That's the quarantine corner. Should have been.
The quarantine corner.
Don't mind me, I'm just.
Teresa has both. Teresa, do you have both Rebecca and
No, I
Michelle,
just
or-
have Rebecca. I was told Kim is gonna have Michelle, but I can add Michelle if I need to.
Oh, no, we were just discussing the logistics of the various quarantine corner.
No.
I think so. I already got I can give her. I can still
Well, it appears that we are approximately 6 p.m., so I would like to call to order the 17th regular meeting of the Board of Directors of SAD 52, and if Joanne could lead us in the pledge. Thank you. So our first order of business would be to act on the minutes of March 25th. Any errors or omissions on those? Seeing none, we'll accept those under general consent. Communications, Kim.
There are no communications this evening.
Well, that brings us to our budget work session then. So 4.1.1 indicates initial review of budget locations as follows, which is a little misleading because at this point we are down to the revisit list, if I am not mistaken. Kim, do we have printed copies of everything that's on the revisit list, or is that, it's not a long list?
It's not a long list, Betsy. I'd like to read what we have on there.
Yes.
Okay. So
Thank
we have on there TPS kindergarten ratio 18:1. A board member voiced a concern about that ratio, wondering if there would be much room if we had additional students. The second thing is the half-time pre-K teacher at TPS. The third is a half-time pre-K ed tech, also at TPS, and both of those positions are maintaining current staffing. Then the fourth was the contingency teaching position, which we had removed in the budget. And then the last thing is the books and periodical lines for library in all locations. That would be line 56400.
Thank you. So just to be clear, make sure that everyone's clear on what is actually in the budget currently and what of those items is not, if we're looking at our totals. So the first item, when we talked about a concerning ratio for kindergarten at TPS, there's no dollar figure attached to that. Like, there isn't something that's been either removed or added at this point. Yes?
Correct.
Okay. Half-time pre-K at TPS and half-time pre-K ed tech, those are currently contained in the budget?
They are currently in the budget and they do represent current staffing.
The contingency teacher position is not in, correct?
Correct. We had removed that from the initial proposed budget.
And what dollar figure does that represent?
$68,000.
Thank you. And then the books and periodicals, line was a discussion around whether the level that is contained in the budget is appropriate or not.
That is correct. A member of the public spoke at the last board meeting, asking the board to consider restoring the original amounts for those lines in all schools.
Thank you. So given that it's a relatively short list, unless board members feel otherwise, we could take up each one individually. If there would be a motion for some sort of action on each of them as we go, or if there isn't a motion, then they would remain as they are currently. So the first one was Turner Primary School, kindergarten staffing level. Jessica?
So I believe I added that to the revisit list, but it was part of the contingency teacher position. So when follow-up question was asked, what about that contingency was I looking at? I was looking specifically at one of those areas, which was the K size. So those are, to me, the same.
Are tied together, okay. Were there other board members that were thinking differently around that particular one, or is that something we should kind of wrap into the contingency position discussion? Yes.
Mine is sort of on the same issue, but looking at that list of ratios, teachers to students, there's 18 to 1 in the kindergarten at Turner Primary, but if you also look at Green Central, it's 19 to 1 for grade 5. So I'd like that maybe addressed at the same time if that's possible.
Thank you. So what I've heard so far is that particular discussion has to do with the need for contingency position or not? And then is it accurate to say that your concerns at Green Central School would be in that same discussion as well? Thank you. Moving down the list to the halftime pre-K. Yes. Oops, sorry, Teresa.
Would everyone be able to use a microphone? It's difficult for some people to hear. Please, thank you.
Thank you. Yes. So there are microphones on the table. I think that they are spread out a little bit. We have one on this end, I think. Is that one that's live? Okay. So there's that one, and so it's this other end of the table that, is there, okay. Thanks, Teresa, for pointing that out.
I don't think it's necessary for anyone to repeat it because I figured out from the context of the conversation we're talking about, but just going forward, thank you.
Moving forward, so hopefully that means that everybody here and at home can hear us as well, so thanks for the heads up on that. So halftime teaching position pre-K at TPS. Is there a motion of some sort on this one? Yes.
I think
Jessica.
Richard last time had, Richard, tell me if I'm wrong. Oh, sorry. I think Richard added it because last year, anytime there was a new position, we would add that to the revisit list so that we could check on it. But when we learned more about it, it turned out this was not a new position. It was just kind of an updated position, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's a great segue to Kim. Can you touch on what those two positions, and Jessica's exactly right. I think Richard was recalling our process last year, that anything that showed as an additional position, we had moved to the revisit list for additional discussion.
Yes, so the reason that those two positions show, or the teaching position shows as new, is because in last August we had a teacher retirement. Because we had the hybrid model and we had smaller cohorts, we did not need to fill that position. However, we needed an additional half-time pre-K teacher, so we used half of that open position for the pre-K, which meant that now when we go forward to next year's budget, we want to officially say we need that full position back for next year, and we need to maintain the staffing in pre-K.
Questions for Kim on that description of, and does that apply to both of those, both the ed tech and the teaching position? Was that related to staffing?
Yes, I'm going to ask Ryan to speak to that, please.
Thank you.
So, I'm sure we're all very aware of how critical pre-K is, especially the pre-K program at Turner Primary School. And historically, Turner Primary School has had enrollments in the mid-60s for pre-K. And I'm really proud to share that we haven't had to turn a student away from our pre-K because it's been full. So having enrollments in the 60s, we always had 3 teachers. Unfortunately, in 2016, that happened to be a year when we had less students, so we lost a pre-K teacher, and there happened to be 48 students that year, and since then we have continued to have enrollment in the 60s, and we have needed to have those 3 teachers and those 3 ed techs to support those classrooms. And we already have a lot of registrations for next year, and so I'm anticipating that we will have that same number of students. And we definitely want our students to have a positive start to school at Turner Primary School. And numbers in the 60s require that staffing to support them.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Do I remember correctly that there's actually a state statute around the staffing levels for
Yes.
that as well, and that's
Yeah.
changed over the last few years?
Yes, that is correct. And we actually had to get some waivers because we broke those numbers. So we had more kids in there than when we were supposed to. And we were informed that we really needed to make sure that we had the staffing levels to match the students in our school.
Thank you. Other questions on those? And I think our discussion is referring to both of these positions, really, isn't it? Is that accurate?
Correct, yes.
Thank you. Any interest in doing something different with these two than leaving them as they are in the budget? Richard?
So if we do nothing, they stay in the budget, and they're already in there now.
It's like the spaghetti sauce. They're in there. Yes. But because they showed as new positions, you rightly suggested that we put them on this list for more discussion. So moving down the revisit list to the contingency, district-wide contingency teacher position, which is currently, was a cut that the administrative team had made, so that does not exist in the budget, correct?
Yes. We made that cut initially for the initial proposed budget.
Thank you. Are there board, Richard?
Could we have a rationale for all of this?
So the rationale for eliminating the contingency position was looking at the budget and trying to figure out how to balance needs with fiscal responsibility.
Richard?
So you're saying we do not need this teacher?
What I'm saying is that every single year, we've had a contingency position in the budget in case we have an influx of enrollment and we would need a teacher. So we don't know at this point that we need that teacher, but we do keep it in there in case that should happen.
Thank you. Other either desire for action on this one or additional questions? Richard?
And we're talking $60,000?
About $68,000, yes.
I would like to make a motion that we do not include this in the budget, but urging the administration to come to us as soon as possible if there is a crisis arising around this lack of funding.
So as far as the motion's concerned, it's not in there now. So from an action standpoint, the not having it in there isn't needed.
Okay, so you don't need that motion?
No, like the reverse of the spaghetti sauce. There's no mushrooms in this one. Like it's not in there. If we wanted to do something different, then we would certainly need to have a motion to add.
I always need to be clarified.
And I think the point around certainly keeping the board apprised, and I'm glad you specified what sort of an emergency it might be, because we seem to have new ones all the time, and that's something I am confident that the administrative team will keep us posted on if enrollment starts doing wacky things and we find ourselves in a strange place staff-wise. Any other discussion on that one, or if not, we can move on to books and periodicals. And I think, based on the questions last time, there was additional information or additional clarity that the board was looking for tonight on just exactly what the comparative numbers were the last couple budget years, and then what the points that were brought up as far as what that level ought to be as well.
Yeah, so Betsy, I'm actually on a Zoom with Business Manager Coates, so that she can be here in case the board has any questions that she would need to take care of. So I'm going to start providing the board some information about the lines for books and periodicals in library for each school, and then she may also add in if we can figure out how to make her heard. So the information that Michelle put together for me for this evening includes a little bit of history. So if we look at, it's warrant article 7. And we start on page, let's see, start on page 7, actually. And down toward the bottom, you have line 56400, which is TPS library books and periodicals. So that first column, prior actual, from 2019 to 2020, is what was actually spent. Right, that actual is what was spent that year. Then we have what was adopted for this current year and what is proposed for FY22. So I also wanted to give the history, because what had happened was we had a cut. We had some cuts in last June for this current year that impacted these lines. And then as the administrative team worked to develop the proposed FY22 budget, we also did some cuts in this line. So I'm going to tell you what those were. So we'll start at TPS, and the FY20 budget was, let me see, where are we? FY20 budget, that what was budgeted was $6,277. What was expended is the number we see here, $2,096. For FY21, originally we had budgeted $6,210, but then we made cuts in June, and we cut $2,300, so that we ended up with $3,870 for this current year. Now for FY22, when we were originally developing the budget, we started by putting $5,625 into that line, but ended up cutting it back again to the $3,870.
Kim, can you provide us with what the per pupil number ends up being, either at that 5625 or the 3,800 that we?
So per pupil is, I'm looking at Michelle's, I talked to you, is $22.50, correct? Yes.
At the 3,800 or at the other number?
So when we go to, when we decide what is allowed to be spent for that, it's $22.50 per pupil is generally how we would start.
But which figure gets us? Does the 2250 get us to the 5600, or does it get us to the 3800?
Yes, to the larger number.
Thank you.
Okay, certainly. Do you want me to do the same, Betsy, for each of the lines?
Is that information that board members would find helpful for each of the locations, or is that? Yes.
Yes, okay. All right, so the next one would be TE, Turner Elementary School. Which is on page 8. Sort of about midway through TES there. And we have, let's see, FY20, what was budgeted was $6,255. What was expended was $2,971. Then for FY21, what originally was budgeted was $6,367, but then we made cuts in June, and we ended up actually at $3,968. For FY22, we started at, when we were developing the budget, we started at $6,277, cut it again back down to the $3,968.
Richard?
Kim, why were cuts made in June?
So last year, remember last year was our budget process that lasted way longer than normal, and we were virtual, and the process changed. So the board decided in June to to present a 0% tax impact budget. So we made cuts. So the next school is Green Central School. That's still on page 8 at the bottom there. And GCS, what was budgeted for FY20 was $8,752. What was expended is the number that you see there, $5,401. For FY21, we originally budgeted $8,752, but we made the cuts in June, and we ended up with $5,455. For developing the FY22 budget, we began with $7,672, and we stayed there because that, what by mistake did not get adjusted. I'm looking at Michelle now, and she's nodding yes. For Leeds Central School, now on page 9 at the top, what was budgeted for FY20 was $5,400. Wait a minute.
The minimum.
I'm sorry, Michelle, what?
It's the minimum. 5,400 is always the minimum.
Oh, 5,400 is the minimum. Okay, thank you. That's right, so $2,250 per student or a minimum of $5,400. Correct, Michelle? Okay, all right. What was expended was $5,367. Originally for FY21, we budgeted $5,400. Then that was cut in June, and we landed on $3,365. Then originally, when we were developing the FY22 budget, we started with $5,400. That was cut again to remain at $3,365. Next is Tripp Middle School, also on page 9. And for Tripp, what was budgeted for FY20 was $7,110. What was expended was $2,560. Originally for FY21, we budgeted again $7,110, made cuts in June, and landed on $4,431. Then when we originally began developing the FY22 budget, we started with $6,412, made cuts again, trying to keep my eyes straight on all these lines, down to $4,431. And then last but not least, on page 10 is the high school. And what was budgeted in FY20 was $13,987. What was expended was $12,901. For FY20 originally, we budgeted $13,982, made some cuts, and landed on $8,715. Then, when we were at first developing the FY22 budget, we started with $12,825, made cuts again before coming forward with the proposed budget, and that landed us at $8,715.
One other question on those, Kim. When you talked about the budgeted versus the prior actual line showing the actual expenditures, is that the difference in what was budgeted in 1920 versus what was actually expended is related to what?
Do you mean why wasn't all the money spent?
Right.
Well, that could be a number of reasons.
I could give an explanation.
Thank you, Judith.
Thank you.
So those, if you'll notice, the difference is larger at the elementary and middle schools than it is at the high school. That was my 10th or something year there, so I knew that often the budget gets frozen early, so I made sure to spend all my money. These other two, it was their first year, and they were getting used to the position, and the budget got frozen, and they weren't. And they often will save money for their main student book award program books and couldn't spend it. So they had it ready to be spent, but couldn't spend it. And the other thing you had asked about the dollar amount per student, those figures that are currently in the budget this year are $14 to $15 per student.
Thank you. Is there an interest in doing something different from what we see in the budget currently? Richard?
I would like to see this 14, did you say 14?
It depends on the school. I know at Trip it's 14, at 11 it's around 15. I don't know the elementary schools.
I would like to see that raised. I don't know if somebody can give me numbers, but suppose we went to $20 per student. What kind of a budget impact would that have?
So, sorry, I'm talking to Michelle. So Michelle, before I share with the board, I want to make sure that it looks to me like we restored to the original that we planned on for FY22. That would be an additional $12,188. Okay. And if we had restored FY21 back to its original before the cuts in June, it would have been $18,000.
Correct. It was a reduction in students.
Reduction in students.
Yeah, so we started at a lower amount for FY21 than we did FY20. And rather than do it by percentage like we did for last year, we just decided to cut it to the FY21 amount. So that's why all the amounts are different, even though the student counts are. So it ended up being less of a percentage of a cut because there are less students.
Okay. So I think the board might be interested in knowing what it would look like to restore. So choices could be that we would restore back to the original FY22 that we were planning, or that we would restore back to the original FY21 before cutting. Those differences would be, if we restored back to FY22 before cutting, it would be an additional $12,188. If we restored back to the FY21 original before the cuts in June, that would be an additional $18,000.
Thank you. Gail, did you have?
I just want to clarify for Tripp Middle School, our students have never gone without the money for main student book awards. Even though there's a freeze, I've always requested from the current superintendent to free up the money to get those books, because that program's so important to Tripp Middle School. And the teachers want to read those books before they get in the schools in the fall. So Tripp has never gone without main student book award money.
Richard, does that answer your question as far as what some of the dollar figures might be?
I've heard
Judith.
a proposal for $20 per student. I guess I'm kind of confused as to why we can't do that, because that's how we figure our budgets in the first place. We go with I develop my budget. If each one of us does that at our schools. So I guess I'm kind of confused why we can't use whatever student count it is we used in the fall, even, or now, whichever way it works for whomever.
Teresa?
And do $20 a budget like Richard was proposing.
Yep, and Teresa, did you have something along those
I
lines, or were you?
believe Michelle had some additional information that she had gathered, Kim, because she had checked in with me, and I can't remember if a board member asked last week about any money for books that had been purchased with the ESSER or the CRF funds.
Yes. So I'm going to, Michelle, at least it's kind of weird because I don't think I can see you. Okay. Go ahead.
I can't see them. Put your screen up. There you go. Hi, guys. So as part of CRF1, CRF2, and CRF2 Plus, we did purchase $16,500 worth of library books. We also ordered some other library supplies that totaled $3,200. And we also ordered $200,000 worth of textbooks, which I know are not library, but they still are, they're still books, and they're still for students, and they're still for instruction and for learning. So I did just want to share that with all of you. And we do have, we also have sort of 3 coming as well. So there may be some opportunity there. I don't know. That's a team decision, but.
Thanks, Michelle. Jessica?
So when you say library, Michelle, I think last meeting you mentioned those were for classroom libraries, not the school libraries. Is that correct?
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear what the question was.
So Jessica said that last week, you mentioned there was money expended out of CRF for classroom libraries versus library.
Yeah, yes, that would be the 200. It was about $217,000. That was for classroom library at the high school for instructional books. We had 5,000 out of CRF2, had about 41,000 out of CRF1, and 170,000 out of CRF2 Plus.
So Michelle, did any books for the actual libraries get purchased out of the CRF funds?
The library ones would be part of the $16,500, which were separate from that $217,000.
Thanks, Michelle. So where are we at on this one? Are folks interested in doing something different from what we have in the budget currently? If so, I'd entertain a motion. Did you mean for that to be a motion?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
so what are the particulars of said motion? then?
My motion is that we raise the amount to $20 per student for all the libraries in all the schools in the next year's budget.
Do you have a second?
Yeah, it'll take me a couple minutes.
And Joanne seconded that. So Michelle's working on what that actual dollar figure would be. In the meantime, do we have additional discussion on this? Danielle?
So at Lead Central School, our minimum amount is $5,400 because we don't have the large population of students. So if we always went with the student amount at Lead Central School, our library would be very meager. So if you're going straight with $20 per student, if my calculation's right, I think my October 1st count was $179, and I'd only have $3,580. I'd really like to be, I don't even know what's in the current budget, but think that's about it.
Your current figure in the budget, Danielle, is $3,365.78.
So that's about $3,500, which is all that you'd be doing with your $20. So if you would consider amending that a little bit to bring leads up a little bit more than what the $20 would give us, I'd really appreciate that.
Thank you. Yuri?
I think that knowing that with the funding that we spent this winter, that would return us close to what was originally budgeted, right? Because if to get back to the budget would cost us $12,000 and we spent 16, then it seems that we're pretty close to what we would normally spend in a normal year. Am I misunderstanding that?
I'm sorry, Eric, can you repeat that?
Yeah, so Yuri's question was, if in fact we had 16.5 from, whether it was CRF 1, 2, or 2 plus, I don't honestly remember, that went to library books, that is somewhere in that range of either 12,188 or 18,000 for FY22 or 21. Is that accurate that we've?
Yes, so, can you hear Michelle?
No.
Okay, so the 16.5 that was spent at CRF for library, that was specific with library books?
Yes.
Yes, so yes, that's,
It was the physical books and the e-books. I just have to clarify that.
okay, so the 16.5 that was spent out of federal emergency funding was for library, it was both hard copy books and there were also e-books included in that. So yes, that is between the 12,000 and the 18,000, but they weren't all hard books, some of them were e-books as well.
Whereas what shows up in this line that's under discussion would be, the line is described as books and periodicals. Would that be a similar set of items that goes in there, or is that not?
Do you hear that?
No.
Do we normally have e-books in the same line, 56400?
I haven't seen the e-books purchased before.
Okay, so I don't know if Judith knows for sure, but Michelle has not seen e-books purchased before from the 56400 line.
We didn't hear you.
So I think the question was around ebooks. If some of that 16.5 was ebooks that were purchased with some of the relief funds, is that? Yes.
So at Lebanon, I got $1,000 of that $16,000, and I did purchase ebooks because we had 2 weeks to get stuff, and that was the best way I could do it. At Trip, how much did you get?
1,500 each.
1,500. I thought
Yes,
it was 1,000.
yeah,
Okay, I'm sorry.
1,500 at Trip,
And at Lebanon.
and you had a very short turnaround time.
Yeah, we had a really short turnaround time, so we purchased some ebooks, which sadly have not been used a lot. Actually, I got audiobooks.
I didn't purchase any ebooks. All print,
Actual books you could touch.
all actual books, yeah, at Trip Middle School.
Joanne?
Well, I have a question. I don't know if people can hear me because I don't have a microphone. But what would be the difference between ebooks that we purchase and the books that are available through Maine Virtual Library? Because they have an extensive library available.
It depends on the town that you live in, though. So the Maine Virtual Library, do you mean the digital Maine Library? Like the databases?
Yes.
Those are research databases primarily. There's not a lot of books that you can read. The other piece is that not all students, ebooks are not widely circulated no matter how much you push them. So if we're talking about free choice reading and wanting students to have as much access to books to be able to further their reading skills essentially and to learn to like to read, we need actual books and current diverse books for these kids, actual books in hand. For whatever reason, kids do not do ebooks that much.
I agree with that, but I know there's an extensive amount of books in the virtual library. That's why I wondered why we were purchasing them.
Are you talking about the cloud library, or are you talking about a school library?
Maine Virtual Library. It used
The
to be
Digital Maine
called
Library.
Marvel.
It's the Digital Maine Library is a resource database. You can get newspapers, you can go to National Geographic Kids, and that's how we use it. I honestly don't know if there's a section that has fiction books in it to read.
I'm sure it does.
I think you might, there's a distinction between digital main library is the free databases for people of Maine, and then there is the cloud library, which is the fiction and nonfiction books. They're kind of two separate things, but both provided by Maine State Library.
And those in the cloud library, for instance, we did at the high school, the North Star Book Award program. And you couldn't get those, but you had to wait a long time to be able to check out one of those digital books, or because they're so popular, and there aren't that many copies.
Thank you.
Other discussion on this? Do we have a figure? A dollar figure?
I texted you the answer.
I was trying to do my own calculations.
$6,055.64 to increase it to $20 per student.
Okay, 60,000, wait, no,
No,
6,000. 6,000?
6,000.
But did that take into account leads that normally has 5,400, which is more than that for a student?
I made it $20 per.
Okay, I'm gonna have to, I'm gonna put this up. Okay, go ahead.
So it ends up being an increase of $6,055.64. It's $20 per student. And I did use $20 per student for leads as well, because we had below the 5,400. So that gives them an increase as well from the cut amount.
So, an addition of $6,055 gets us to $20 a student?
Will get us $20 per student.
Crystal? Yep.
May I ask what it is to get to the $22?
Yeah, so the question is, what is it to get to the $22? Because I think that was one of the figures that we had before.
Betsy, do you mean 22 or 2250?
2250. Sorry.
2250 would be the amount that we cut, which was the 12,188.
That doesn't make sense. So it's 12,188 to get to 2250, and it's 6,055 to get to 20.
So we cut 12,188. We didn't use student count to come up with the cut. We just cut based on make it the same as last year. We didn't use, last year we used student count, and well, we took a percentage and we based cuts on a percentage based on student count to come up with an $18,000 cut. This year, we didn't base the cut on student count. We took a lower number of students because of the October 1st student count being so low, and we cut it to reflect the same as FY21.
Okay. That's still making my brain hurt. I don't, yeah.
Want to take a look at it? Come on, I can share it with you.
Yes, I'm doing some addition.
Okay. Got it right here, so.
In the meantime, do we have additional discussion on it? I'm seeing the microphone moving. Teresa and then Olivia. Teresa.
Go ahead, Olivia, you go first.
Just as a student, I'd like to say, especially at Leavitt, that I would like to see the funding increase for physical books. I know that Ms. Lashman shared at the last meeting how most of the books are outdated, that the average year of the books is fairly old, and I've recognized that as well, and I would like to see that funding increased.
Thank you. Teresa?
I just wanted difference. However, the ones that were purchased for classroom libraries, so all classrooms pre-K to 8, with a couple of exceptions, received, I believe there were 400 titles in the book kits that they received. I'm calling them kits. They were lots and lots of boxes. And then at the high school, the VPA and the foreign language, ELA, and social studies also received some books, if I'm recalling correctly. They don't replace the books in a library for sure, and I think the librarians know how much I value the library. I just wanted to share that I really have advocated for books to be purchased. I don't think anywhere in this budget anyone's necessarily pleased with the cuts that we made from our initial proposed budget. I think we really just tried to be fiscally responsible while, like Superintendent Brand said, balancing the needs. And if there's more federal funding and we're allowed to purchase more books, the ad team knows I'll be advocating for that.
Thank you. Other discussion? Danielle.
Okay, so in the current budget, it's $3,365.78 in the current budget after they were cut from the $5,400 I originally requested. And the $5,400 has been my number every year because of my small student count. Because when you do 179 students times the 2250 that all the other schools go by, I would only be getting 4,027. So since before I came here 11 years ago, we've always done, you get a minimum of 5,400 or the 2,250 per student, whichever is higher. So if you went with the $20 per student, that would give me $3,580, which is only $214 more than what's in the current proposed budget. That's why I'm advocating for, I would like you to restore the 2,250 that we asked for in the beginning, or the $5,400 minimum. I think the best choice and the easiest way to do this would be just to restore it back to the original proposed amount that the administrators turned in before we had to start making cuts to our budget.
Thank you. And I would, I guess, like to echo what Teresa just said too, though. I mean, I don't think there's any area in this budget that matches up 100% with probably what administrators requested initially, and I certainly don't think that our administrative team makes requests initially that are particularly padded, so to speak. So I'm pretty sure that there are lots of areas that experience cuts, and certainly this is one that has generated some discussion, but I really don't want to lose sight of that fact that we've been, everyone, working pretty hard to get to a budget that's under 4% impact to the taxpayers in our towns. And in order to get there, has required a lot of choices. And I certainly don't think any of them exist in isolation. Judith?
I would agree with what you said. However, part of why we are advocating so strongly for this year is that cut that was made last year shocked all three of us. None of us knew it was happening. It was a last-minute cut because of things that had happened. And we would have been here just as strongly advocating for that last year. And I agree with Danielle that the 5,400 makes sense at Leeds. We would like to see at least some increase. The amount that's in my budget right now is what it was 11 years ago. I will do everything I can do, but as Olivia said, I think it's not quite as drastic as she said about the collection, but it takes a lot to be able to build a vibrant library collection.
So have we done a little work on whether that 6,055 is correct, or is that, I guess going back to Richard with your motion, is that the number that you were thinking?
We never did get an answer to Crystal's question.
To the 2250.
2250, how much is that?
We did. 12,188.
Differences in
So,
That's right.
so not that this isn't fun, but the board does have the ability to pick a dollar figure and direct folks to back figure how many dollars per student. And I think Judith's point around if the board wishes to do something more than what is contained in the budget currently, then I'm not sure that we can do that.
So can I withdraw my motion and submit a new one?
You have a couple options. You can either withdraw it, or if whomever seconded the motion is amenable to a changed motion, that would be acceptable
Okay,
as
then I'd
well.
like to change my motion to be for, what is it, $22.50 per student,
Per student.
per student.
Joanne, are you amenable to that amount at $22.50 per student?
Sure.
So the motion and the second, so the motion now is to increase those lines that end in 56400 to a per student number of $22.50. And we think that that dollar figure would be the $12,188, is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. So discussion, since we have a dollar figure. Any additional discussion? Jessica?
So my only concern with that is that we're using our October 1st child count, which was, 90 students shy of what our normal is. So I don't know if you would be interested in making an amendment to your amendment, Richard, but if we could do that 2250 based on what our October 1st count was the year prior, which is probably more accurate.
So what was that count, dude?
No.
So we're basing this based on the amount of kids.
Remembering that that would change that dollar figure again.
Jessica suggested that we do it according to what the 2009 October 1st count was. There's more students. It would be 2,003 students.
That would be 2,000, FY21 original amount,
It would, yeah, whatever, based on,
which would be, okay.
which would be 18, it'd be like 18,000, right?
18,000, yeah.
Okay, so I don't know if you can hear us talking, but that would be 18,000.
So that takes us to that would take us to the 18,000 if we
Yes.
made that change.
Yes.
So this is getting confusing as to what the actual motion is. Do you want to make an amendment to that motion? Because we've kind of gone back and forth on what it is. Jessica, is that what so your amendment would be?
So my amendment would be that we do the 2250 per student based on the October 1st count of 2019, not 2020, which would bring us back to the fiscal year 19 or 20, which is the 18,000.
Do we have a second for the amendment? Carlos? So discussion on the amendment, because we need to take that up first. Kim, did you have?
Yes, Michelle has some additional information. Go ahead.
So it actually would be more than 18,000 because the FY22 when we started was reduced by the student count. So we would have to bring it back to FY21 student count, which was $47,822. When we started out this year, we're at $44,212.50. So the difference between those is $36.10. And then to get it back up to $22.50 from last year's number would be an additional $18,000. So that's $21,610.
Do you mean an additional 3,600?
I mean an additional $3,610 on top of the $18,000.
Okay.
You're trying to get it back to FY21, correct?
Right, you just said, yeah, you just said an additional 18,000. You said an additional 3,600.
Oh, so it's 3,600 plus the 18,000.
So we have an amendment and a second to that amendment, and that's what we're discussing right now, understanding that the dollar figure that would be discussed would then be 21,610? 21,600 versus the cost on the original motion was $12,188. 12,000?
Yes.
Okay. Discussion on the amendment? Evan?
I am never going to stand up and advocate against library books. But I am going to bring us back to the point you made a few minutes ago about none of these decisions are made in isolation. And all of this budget has been built on our October 1 count. It would be weird to build one line on a different count.
Thank you. All those in favor of the amendment? Those opposed? Did you get all those, Teresa? So the amendment does not pass? Is that correct?
That is correct. Unless we need to bring in weighted votes, it was 4 to 5. 4 in favor of the amendment.
Yep, and 5 not in
And 5
favor.
opposed to the amendment.
Right. I was thinking we only had to do that if it was tied. Yeah. So I don't, and wind speed is a factor as well. It's not really, I'm sorry. It's,
Okay, so against was, was Betsy, was that? Oh, I thought you said you hadn't do it, when you do it, no? Okay.
no, so we're,
But I did.
okay. So the amendment fails. So the original motion of increasing that line by 12,188, that's what our original motion was, yes? All those,
I only caught 12,000, and then I heard Michelle say 12,000 again, but I think there's numbers after the 12,000.
Yes.
Yes, well,
12,188.
Thank you.
that. Thank you. All those in favor of that? Those opposed? Those abstaining? What was the total then?
So
On the votes?
4 abstain, 3 yes, and 2 no.
So it passes?
So it looks like it passes.
Okay. Thank you. And that brings us to the end of our revisit list. Richard?
I just feel compelled to say this, and I'm speaking now to the librarians. If you have a budgeted amount of money, for heaven's sakes, spend it. I don't understand.
Yeah, so I think we've had
That's-
budget freezes, like when, say, hypothetically speaking, when a pandemic falls upon us, I think there are probably not just library books that didn't get purchased if they didn't have to. I mean, I think that's probably why we have some flexibility to work with things in this budget, so certainly. So is there anything else? There's nothing else on the revisit list that takes us all of that. I presume Michelle's going to give us an updated number then, because that does change our total.
that's correct. I'm ready when you are.
Hope you're ready for me. I'm sorry. You separate the budget to 28,305,315. Budget is 0.5%. And tax impact is 3.64%.
Okay, so I'm gonna repeat this, 28,305, 315, 0.85, and 3.64.
Yes.
Okay.
Betsy, would you like me to give the updated numbers?
That would be lovely, because at this point, we are at the bullet point that is described as adoption of the final proposed FY22 budget, so we'll need that for a motion.
Okay. So with that addition of the 12,188, that brings the budget to 28,305,315. That brings us to a budget-to-budget 0.85% increase. Overall tax impact of 3.64%.
Thank you. Do we have a motion for adoption?
So moved.
Carlos, do we have a second? Jessica? Discussion? I'd just like to thank everybody that was involved in working through this budget process. Obviously, as the discussion around books and periodicals highlighted, there's probably a lot about this to not particularly love, but it does that balancing act between fiscal responsibility and recognizing that we're in the middle of, this is a really, really long middle, I think, of a pandemic, and there are still lots of unknowns out there, so thanks to everyone for all the work that went into this. All those in favor of adopting the proposed budget? Those opposed? One opposed? The motion passes, and we have a final proposed budget. Thank you. Other, we don't have any other items as they pertain to budget specifically. Our next item is an adjustment to the agenda, and that is to move agenda item 10.12 before agenda item 10.1.
And Betsy, there are some other adjustments as well.
There's another adjustment as well?
There are several more, yes.
There's several more.
Yes. So 6.6, which is the administrator's reports, and 6.7, which is my report, we are not going to do those because we are going to be doing a lot of presenting on agenda item 10.1, which is the presentation on proposal for increased in-person instructional time. Also, we do not need item 10.6, which is an executive session for ESP. We do not need 10.7, which is any action as needed for that. We do not need agenda item 10.10, which is executive session for TTEA. Nor do we need 10.11, which is action for that.
Thank you. So coming back around to committee reports. Finance Committee.
We did not meet.
Did not meet. PTB, we also did not meet. Curriculum Policy, Joanne.
We have not met.
Olivia, you are here.
Hello.
Here.
I don't have as much to say as I did at the last meeting, but I just want to announce for anyone that didn't hear, Winter Carnival has wrapped up at Levitt. Seniors took first place, sophomores second, freshmen third, and juniors fourth. And other than that, students are just eager to hear about what the plan is for possibly going back to school more often.
Thank you. 6.5, non-teaching negotiations, that's AFSCME and ESP. Jessica?
We have not met.
Thank you. Brings us to public comment. Do we have public wishing to comment at this time? If not, we'll move on to old business, which we don't actually have any of. So we'll try the consent agenda, which we don't have anything on. So there's a theme here. Bringing us to new business, and where we do have an adjustment, and we take up item 10.12, and that would be nomination of Tripp Middle School principal. Dun, dun, dun. Drum roll.
Okay, the search committee is very happy to nominate Jana Mates as the next principal of Tripp Middle School. Jana has 8 years of administrative experience, most recently as principal of Lewiston Middle School. Jana has experience bringing expeditionary learning to her students, and this aligns perfectly with long-term goal number 2 in our strategic plan, which is every MSAD 52 student will regularly experience collaborative and experiential instructional practices that actively engage students in experiential learning. So her experience is really going to support us moving toward that goal at Tripp. Jana's experience as an instructional coach further supports her work with teachers and staff. References describe Jana as a collaborative leader focused on students and their learning, who researches and works closely with teachers and staff to implement practices that support student growth and performance. With high expectations, Jana supports staff in achieving goals and fosters effective communication with all stakeholders. References also included Jana's collaborative and supportive role on the administrative team. It was common for other administrators to reach out to Jana for collaborative thinking and problem solving. One quote when I was checking references was, "Kim, you're getting a really good one." So we are looking very forward to working with Jana beginning in July, and Jana is actually here with us this evening. Jana, would you like to say a word?
Thank you. I wanted to thank the board, the search and hiring committee, and the entire community, which is one where I live and where my children attend, for this opportunity. I'm really excited to be part of this team moving forward.
So do we have a motion to make this official?
Second.
Carlos and Richard. All those in favor? It appears to be unanimous. Welcome. Outstanding. And that brings us back to 10.1, presentation on proposal for increased in-person instructional time. Superintendent Brand, I'll turn that one over to you.
Thank you. I'm going to give a little bit of an overview, and then each of our principals are going to talk about some of the details in the proposed plans that they have for tonight. So to begin, MSAD 52 exists to support our students in their academic learning and in their social emotional well-being. So what is best for our students is always at the center of our work and the center of our decisions. More Mainers are being vaccinated now. The governor is loosening restrictions on both indoor and outdoor gatherings and travel. Androscoggin County remains designated as green, and the national CDC has changed the 6-foot distancing requirement to 3 feet in schools. All of this is very hopeful. We recently also did a parent survey, and through that survey, parents have, and emails as well, parents have told us that they want their children back in person as much as possible. The district has been monitoring the changes and has responded by putting together a re-entry team, reassessing space in each school, and moving classroom furniture into storage containers to further optimize space. Principals have worked with their leadership teams and staff to determine what is possible in terms of increased in-person time, now that we are seeing hopeful signs that we are making progress against COVID-19. We are focused on plans that are realistic, safe, and sustainable. This evening, you will hear the results of an immense amount of hard work, good thinking, analysis, and collaboration. We want our students back in school as much as possible. As you hear each of our principals present their proposals this evening, I ask you to remember 2 important things. First, each principal's proposal is based on the size of his or her school and the number of students in that space. There is no consistent model for increasing in-person instruction that can be implemented in every single school. Each proposal is designed specifically to the students in space in that school. And second, The proposals you are about to hear are based on the hope that we can overcome a couple of very large barriers still before us. One of those barriers is transportation. We are still operating under the 1 student per seat requirements, with the only exception to that being siblings can sit together. If many of our families are unable to help us by transporting their students, we will not be able to move forward with some of the plans you're going to hear tonight, and we will need to go back to the drawing board. Another barrier is related to the arrival of the additional desks, seats, and plexiglass dividers that we have ordered. We must have these supplies in order to implement these proposals because we are still required to distance. Students with all masks on must be 3 feet apart. Once they have a mask off, they must be 6 feet apart. When you think about elementary children, that means breakfast time, lunch time, and we'll be working on what it means for snack and water as well. So it means orchestrating a lot of movement throughout the buildings to move from the smaller class spaces where they are 3 feet apart to a larger space where they can be 6 feet apart. We're all looking forward to warmer weather, and so when there is good weather, outside is an opportunity, but we can't count on that because we will get rain and wind and cold as well. Adults need to be 6 feet still from children and from other adults, so those requirements are still in place. I have heard concerns as we've been working on our proposals. I've heard concerns about so much change with so few weeks left in the school year. I've heard concerns about changing routines for children, families, and staff. I've heard concerns about the possibility of needing to change some students' teachers at this late time in the year. All of these concerns are valid. Change is difficult. The pandemic is taking its toll on all of us and continues to do so. And we will be 8 months into the school year when we make these changes. At the same time, we know that overall, in-person instruction is what is best for our students. They have been thriving during those in-person days, and we really worked hard to try to figure out how we could increase that in-person time as a result. We've also heard from our parents that they want more in-person time. We also know that we do not know what next fall is going to look like. We are all extremely hopeful that there will be no more distancing requirements, but that may not be the case. So if we are able to get increased in-person time this spring, not only will we benefit our students about whom we have been concerned, we've heard concerns from parents about their mental health and their social emotional well-being as well as their growth and learning. We would get a little more time with them, which would be wonderful, but it also would allow us to see what is possible in case we still have distancing requirements in school next fall. We will be able to see what is working, what's working well, what's not working. We would have to consider to do something different. So it will be a chance to have students more time in person and a chance to start doing our planning for next fall in case. So will cases rise again? Will we end up with more students and staff in quarantine? We don't know. What we do know is that school environments continue to be safer than environments in the general community. We also know that as long as we're living in a pandemic, we can expect constant change. And most importantly, we have the right people in this district to face and overcome every challenge we meet. I am not asking the board to approve our plans this evening. Our goal for tonight is to share our thinking to date and then to use this next week to continue to work with the transportation department and our families to find out about that barrier of transportation. That also gives us a little more time to find out when those necessary desks and plexiglass dividers will be delivered. We will be returning here on April 8th with any updates to these plans. Thank you to Eben, to Gail, to Kelly, to Ryan, to Danielle, and to Doug for all of your tireless hours, all of your work with staff, all of your work with me, as we try to figure out how to get our students back in for more time. At this time, I'm going to ask Eben, please, to present your proposal.
Betsy, if you don't mind, before I dive into this, I just wanted to update the board on two things that Olivia had asked about last week. One of them is, well, the prom, it's prom and graduation. So first one's prom, and there's been a fairly substantial group of staff in the building trying to work together to figure out what we might do for prom this year. We have a plan to do something here in the courtyard. We just locked down a 40 by 60 tent on Tuesday. We locked that in. We're going to set that up out in the courtyard. That in conjunction with gym space, in case the weather's not super great, because weather in May is somewhat unpredictable. So that, between that and gym space, we're going to be able to put on a prom. Unlike typical years where it's a junior senior prom, this will be a senior prom, where seniors are invited to bring a guest, but that will allow us to maintain numbers in such a way that we can do it with the tent and the gym space. So the plan for that is May 22nd. We'll be doing that here at school. And now that we know that we have the tent and we can do it, we will work out the finer details, but that's the broad strokes of prom. In regard to graduation, I've been working very closely with the other principals in Androscoggin County to try to figure out what we might do. And with some reduced restrictions around gathering requirements, there was some hope that perhaps we could do something that seemed a little more traditional. Unfortunately, that's really not going to be an option, really for one big reason. And that is that I need to be able to put on a graduation that everybody can attend. And over the last 2 weeks, we've made a lot of close contact phone calls. And that's one thing to be making them in March and April. It's another one to be making them the first week in June to seniors and telling them they can't attend graduation at the Coliseum because they're close contact. So we're going to coordinate with EL Lewiston in Poland. Our graduation will be at the LA airport. And even in the unforeseen event, or perhaps foreseen event, that somebody happened to be a close contact on Sunday, June, I think it's the 6th, they could still attend graduation. They'd have to stay near or in their car, but nonetheless, I can go to them and they can still participate in graduation. So our plan is for that Sunday, the 6th. The time is still a little, I gotta iron it out with Lewiston, because there's gonna be 2 of us doing it on that Sunday. I believe that we can pencil it tentatively at 5 p.m. So that's the update on those 2 items from last week. So now I'm gonna dive into the new item for this week. If I can find all my stuff. Excuse me. So as we looked at various options to increase student time, there were a number of factors that we needed to consider and questions to answer. The most important question, in my opinion, being what is the best that we can do for our students? And I know I've been here over the course of this year, and I've let people know that one of our school goals for the year has been to do the best we can for our kids in the circumstances that we're in. And I know that we've had students that have struggled with the hybrid learning model, and we've consistently heard since school has begun that our students need more time with their teachers and their peers to support their emotional and social well-being. So it would seem that the best we can do is to maximize that time of in-person learning for our students. So to that end, I'm proposing that we return all students in grades 9 to 12 to in-person instruction for 4 days a week, Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday, starting on April 26th. This schedule will clearly increase the amount of time students are in school. My limited math skills would suggest that's a 100% increase, but you can check it if you want to. And while at the same time allowing staff members time on Wednesdays for planning and preparation that will be needed as we move forward in this new model. I feel very fortunate that the size and configuration of my building provide me with the opportunity to make such a sweeping recommendation. This recommendation will likely raise a number of questions, one important one being, why now? And simply put, the conditions have changed. Prior to last Friday, we could only gather together in inside spaces in groups of 50 or less. We are now able to gather in those same spaces in groups that are half the space's capacity. This allows us to develop a schedule that includes larger groups for lunch periods and potentially larger study halls, this change in gathering size quite literally makes a change in schedule possible. Under our current schedule, we have some students who are fully remote, some who are here 2 days a week, and others who are here 4 days a week. In this new schedule, in order for this proposal to work, students who are currently remote will need to remain fully remote, and students who are currently scheduled either 2 days or 4 days will be scheduled for 4 days of in-person instruction. Because teachers will have a clear and consistent class roster, these parameters will allow for more efficient and effective instructional planning. Additionally, this consistent roster allows for planning transportation needs, as Mrs. Brandt pointed out. That's another thing that we need to still work on. Students moving from one model to another, or multiple groups of students in multiple models, will make scheduling transportation virtually impossible. Consistent class rosters are also required in order to plan for the arrangement of classroom furniture. This change will require several adjustments. First and foremost, we will have to reset classrooms to have desks 3 feet apart instead of our current 6 feet apart, and then add additional desks to fill the need. In some cases, spaces aren't large enough to accommodate the entire roster of students for a particular class period. And in these instances, we found larger spaces to hold these classes, which will require a few of our teachers to teach classes in classrooms that are not the ones they're typically assigned to. As I mentioned, this model also brings with it considerations for lunches. And as we know, students need to maintain a distance of 6 feet when their masks are off for eating. We have set up the cafeteria so that between 60 and 70 students can eat and maintain the required distance. And additionally, we will use the bleachers in the gym as a place to spread out students for lunch. Utilizing these 2 spaces will allow us to serve lunches to all students in 3 or 4 servings. We need to figure out whether we'll take 3 or 4. I'm guessing it's going to be 4. We started the year with 4, so I think we can make it happen. This model of serving lunch brings with it a concern over contact tracing. It would be particularly unfortunate if we have a positive case of COVID identified in a lunchroom and then had 60 other close contacts. Potentially increased close contact tracing is a concern that stands on its own. If we do have a positive case, bringing more students into the building brings with it the potential for additional close contacts. I understand that. Fortunately, we found out today that the CDC will be making revisions to contact tracing procedures, and because this information is so new, I don't have all of the implications ironed out at this point. I'm hopeful that with these revisions and some additional steps on our part, we'll have the ability to be more surgical in our identification of close contacts and not have to identify an entire lunchroom. So more to come on that. It sounds promising. Regardless, I think it's important to acknowledge the potential for high numbers of close contacts with one positive case. It is still a very real possibility. Obviously, this will be a substantial change for everyone, and we know that change and the best of times can cause stress for those involved. So I do not want to give the impression that we're going to simply make this happen or that it's going to go off without a hitch. This change will require substantial time for rearranging classrooms, as well as academic planning and preparation. And after students return, there will need to be time spent reacquainting ourselves with the classroom and academic expectations associated with a full roster of students. We will develop plans and contingency plans, and probably contingency plans for those plans. But we're going to need to be very nimble and ready to adjust when conditions require us to do so. Perhaps more so now than at any other time over the last year. This change will require everyone, teachers, students, parents, and support staff to work together, support each other, and look out for one another. Without this level of concerted effort from everyone in the MSAD 52 community, the complex job of a mid-course shift in schedule will be made all the more difficult, and the success of that shift put into jeopardy. Any questions for me?
Questions for Evan at this point? Yuri.
If the remote students stay remote, who teaches them now?
The remote students are currently incorporated into current classes, so they'll continue that way.
Other questions? Mr. Shaw? No? Thank you very much.
Good evening.
I want to start out by thanking the parents who took time to fill out the parent survey about students returning to school. We had 158 responses, many who would like all students back. A small group would like to keep it the way it is, and a third group was not sure which was the best way to go. Many of the concerns that were shared in Mr. Shaw's report also apply to TRIP, including the need for consistent class rosters and assigned seats for contact tracing, and transportation may be a barrier. After a thorough review, TRIP proposes bringing all 7th graders back to in-person instruction 4 days each week, Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, with homework assigned for students to complete on Wednesday, beginning April 26th. In addition, Cohort C students for 8th graders will join their regular classes instead of the current model of 2 days with their cohort and 2 days in a self-contained room. We currently have 14 7th graders and 14 8th graders fully remote, and this plan is based on these students remaining fully remote for the school year. Keeping students 3 feet apart in the classroom is difficult to accomplish with the shape of some of the classrooms in TRIP. The most student desks that can fit in a classroom is 16 student desks. In the 8th grade, we have class sizes of 17 and through 22. For lunch, we have rooms with smaller groups of students that some students can move to so they can stay 6 feet apart to eat lunch. With this plan, 7th graders in cohorts A, B, C will not have remote day lessons. They will have 2 green days and 2 white days each week, with homework assigned to complete on Wednesday. They would not have an option of a hybrid model. We will need time to teach them the PBIS expectations for all settings. The 8th grade will continue with the hybrid model. This is a difficult decision that is not taken lightly, but by being able to bring the 7th grade back, we will give them a more traditional education. Are there any questions?
Richard?
Gail, so the 8th graders are going to be all virtual?
The 8th graders will stay in the hybrid model that they're currently in because I don't have the capacity to put more than 16 desks 3 feet apart in classrooms. Our student enrollment for 8th grade is 157 students, and our enrollment for 7th grade is 127.
Other questions for Gail? Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. Turner Elementary School is looking forward to welcoming all students in grades 3 to 6 back to in-person instruction as soon as possible. We believe maximizing time students have in school is critical in supporting their social, emotional, and academic growth. Various scenarios have been considered and countless hours have been spent looking at how we can adapt, improvise, and overcome barriers that exist due to the physical space while adhering to the guidelines established by the Maine CDC and DOE. The work that has been done has been a collaborative effort. I would be remiss if I did not recognize the TES staff in their approach to being solution-based problem solvers determined to make this happen. Under our current model, we have some students fully remote, some 2 days per week, and others 4 days per week. Turner Elementary School has a plan that will allow students in cohorts A and B to return to in-person instruction 4 days a week, Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday, beginning sometime after April vacation, contingent upon transportation of students, timely delivery and assembly of needed furniture, and plexiglass dividers. The current plan is to begin implementing phases
of return immediately. The phases are as follows. Beginning April 5th, students move out of cohort zones on the playground where they have been restricted to play with classmates within their classroom and into specified grade level areas during recess. Hand sanitizing, masks, and distancing will still be enforced. This will give our students an opportunity to start to engage with those students outside their classroom and begin to learn and relearn some of those social skills needed for the playground. Beginning April 5th, parents will begin using a modified pickup drop-off route which will utilize the new road that runs behind the middle school. Beginning April 12th, students who are most at risk, as identified by chronically absent and legally truant by state guidelines, will return to school 4 days a week. Beginning April 26th, it is our hope to welcome all grade 3 to 6 students back. However, this is dependent on the following factors. Transportation. Our buses are filled to capacity, so students who are dropped off and picked up by parents will need to continue to be driven to and from school rather than riding on the bus. Our Turner families have been incredibly supportive and patient. We will need parents to understand that we will essentially double the number of vehicles during drop-off and pickup. Needed items arriving on time and having the ability to assemble them. Combining 2 grade 6 classes into the gym with teachers who are enthusiastic about taking on this challenge and look forward to team teaching. Bringing them back with the numbers that we have and the size of our classrooms, that would not be possible to do that unless we were able to combine 2 classes. It means reconfiguring grade 4 to allow for students to remain in typical size classrooms while implementing a new learning model. Again, the design of this was created by the teachers involved who have been enthusiastically planning engaging curriculum for the remainder of the year. This plan includes considerations such as how to feed 274 children, both breakfast and lunch, where students are 6 feet apart, facing one direction with masks off. At TES, this means that we will have students who will eat in their classrooms, who will eat in overflow rooms, the cafeteria, the library, chairs distanced around the perimeter of the library and office area, as well as down the JP Hall. Despite the challenges we face and may face in regards to coverage for teachers who are out and possible closures if contact tracing identifies a larger number of students and staff, we believe what is best for our children is to have them back with us 4 days a week. Any questions for me?
Yuri?
I might have missed it, but like the other schools, would remote students stay remote?
Remote students would stay remote. However, I would say, Yuri, that we always want to make sure that, and I can speak for the school, my school, in terms of the planning that we've done, we always would want to make sure that we are looking at each child and their individual needs and be able to look at that to see whether or not we would be able to accommodate that.
Jessica?
What did you mean by restructuring grade 4? Does that mean children are going to change classrooms?
That's a great question, Jessica. So I was really hung up on the fact of how do we take kids who are living through a pandemic and then at this point in the year take them away from their teacher, because as you know, children that age, they love their teacher often, and that would be a hard thing. And so I had spoken with Superintendent Fran about how does this work? And I talked to the teachers about, how are we gonna make this work? The only thing I could come up with was, we need to combine 2 classes, we'll put them in the library, and 2 teachers, like in the 6th grade teachers, they would team teach those kids. But through our conversations and our problem solving, teachers, they're great thinkers, and they said, worry about those kids who are so excited to be in a small group setting for the first time to have a voice. And they're excited they love the small group setting, they think it's really fun. They're speaking up and they're thriving. And we're worried about those kids now losing their voice. They talked about going from a classroom of having kids that are, 9 and 10 kids in the classroom to all of a sudden being in the library with, 40-something children. And they were worried about that. While they were convinced that it would be a lot of fun to team teach, they were still concerned about how do we make sure that the students are feeling okay. So they called me one night as I was driving home from work, and they said, Kelly, we have another idea. And they presented this proposal to me. One of our 4th grade teachers had a baby at the start of the year, and our regular ed tech, Katie Charest, opened the year in that classroom, a 4th grade classroom, and she did a phenomenal job, and it was outstanding. Those children in that classroom are very familiar with her. They love her. Welcoming back Miss Link, they were excited, but they were also sad to see Miss Stress leave. Miss Stress has worked in our school since I've been here, so this is my 5th year. She's very familiar with the kids, and our plan is we've been having Miss Stress go into Miss Stoyer's room and become familiar with her children as often as she can. So what we decided was that we would create that 4th classroom that we didn't hire. By the way, that was one of those grade levels that we had 2 grade levels with teachers, but we didn't hire for the same reason that Superintendent Brandt explained, because we're in the hybrid model, wanting to be fiscally responsible. But still, I was stuck on, but how are you going to pick which ones to go? And they said, we're not, because we haven't figured out. So what they said is, we're going to talk to our kids about creating this team and needing us all to come back to school together, and they're not going to lose any of us, because we're going to create another cluster in that 4th classroom, and we're going to, the teachers will move. So Olivia Joyer will teach one subject, and Mrs. Link will teach another subject, and Mrs. Stress will teach another subject. They'll rotate, so none of those children will lose their classroom teacher completely. They'll have them as part of that, and then they'll do some things to be able to create connections. And they felt like that was a better solution, to have them in a smaller setting than bringing all of those kids together in the library. And I thought that was some pretty creative thinking. And to take that on as for teachers, it's more work to do it that way, but that wasn't what was their focus. Their focus was what was best for children, and what can we do to make sure that this is a good experience as they come back together.
Other questions? No? Thank you.
Good evening. So since it is April Fool's Day, I just want you to know I had a student tell me I looked like a peep today, so I had to share that. Anyway, thank you very much for allowing me the opportunity to lead Turner Primary School. Ensuring our youngest students are cared for, instructed, and kept safe is of the utmost importance, especially during the pandemic. As we think about adding more in-person instruction, the big questions, as Superintendent Brandt shared, what is safe, sustainable, and realistic? Turner Primary School has not had large groups from mixed classrooms gathering for lunch, breakfast, or on the playground. And please remember that these groups are between 60 and 70 5-year-olds, 6-year-olds, and 7-year-olds. They still need a lot of help and guidance when it comes to being able to meet all of these guidelines. Also, our kindergartners have never known school beyond 2 days a week. Having kids more in school will build up their stamina. We know many students have struggled with the current hybrid model, and we know that remote learning doesn't match the learning style of our youngest students. We have also heard consistently since school began that our students need more time with their teachers and peers to support their social emotional well-being. It would seem then that the best we can do is to maximize the amount of in-person time for our students. Combining cohorts is contingent upon the delivery of furniture. This change in instructional model will require several adjustments. First, we have to reset the classrooms to have desks 3 feet apart instead of 6 feet apart, and then add additional desks to those spaces. We have, as Superintendent Brandt shared, we have ordered those desks. Then we need to empty out the gym and set up dining areas for our groups of students to have breakfast and lunch. I'm really fortunate at TPS. I have a cafeteria and a gym, and so the hope would be if we clean out both of those spaces, we would have enough room for all of our students to eat both breakfast and lunch. Combining cohorts is contingent upon transportation and checking in with families about the survey results. A huge thank you to the Turner community. We had 171 parents complete the survey, which is very impressive. And one of the big questions I had for second grade was the question about whether they would be willing to have their child change teachers. As Superintendent Marston shared, that's a significant impact on students to change teachers, especially this late in the year. So one of my big jobs is going to be to check in with those second grade families who marked that and check in with them to make sure that they're aware of that and what those implications might be. This model also brings with it considerations for breakfast. Turner Primary School would feed up to 130 students breakfast every morning, but we would use the cafeteria and the gym as the overflow. I kind of picture like a hula hoop trail from when they get off the bus. They stand in the hula hoops and walk in the front door, go down the hallway past the library, go into the gym, follow the hula hoop trail, grab their breakfast, and then find one of the desks to sit at to eat breakfast. As you know, students would need to maintain a distance of 6 feet when their masks are off. Providing time for breakfast may take time away from classroom learning. Our specials right now in our classes start between 9:15 and 9:30, so that might take a little bit of adjustment depending on how much time it takes that many students need breakfast in the morning. This model also brings with it considerations for lunch. As we know, students need to maintain a distance of 6 feet, and we hope to set up the cafeteria. Each grade level is about between 60 and 70 students. So if we had 4 rows, 1 for each class, they would have designated dining. They would have a designated seat that they ate lunch at. So we'd have 4 rows in the gym, 1 for each of the classes. And utilizing these 2 spaces would allow us to serve lunch to all of our students. In summary, our current plan could be implemented in phases. So like Kelly Marston shared, we have playground zones at TPS. One of them right now is flooded. It's our field. So we've been encouraging the students who play in the field zone to go in the upper bus loop zone and play with that group of students. We also have, it's called Penguin Hill. I don't know if you're aware of the back of the school, but there's 2 little sledding hills. One group is on each area, so we've encouraged them to start to play together. So that's one of our ideas, to combine more kids to get them used to being around more kids. Also, we would have to revise our parent pickup and drop-off plan. I don't know if you're aware, but the parents park on the dirt road on Cobb, and it usually goes all the way to Angelo's. So one cohort, the line goes all the way to Angelo's. So the idea might be, is we can't have the line crossing that crazy intersection. So one idea could be, is there a way that we could use Back Cove Road going the opposite way to have a row of cars lined up for pickup? And then we would begin to phase in students by grade level dependent on the factors that I listed and that I stated earlier, which are transportation, the arrival of our desks and our plexiglass, the reconfiguration of our grade 2 classes, and really checking in with those parents who did that survey to really make sure that they're clear on what they're comfortable with and what they would like to happen for the last quarter for second grade. I'm not sure if you're aware, but we had 3 second grades at the beginning of the year, and because we had so many registrations, we added a 4th second grade in January, and so every new student that has joined Turner Primary School has gone into that additional, not additional because it's really the 4th, but into that 4th second grade classroom. So what we would have to do is we would have to move 3 students from each of our second grades into that room to make room for all of the students. As other principals have shared, we can fit in TPS 15 to 18 students in each room, 3 feet apart. And so our second grade, the cohorts are too big for that, and which is why we would have to move some kids into a different second grade class, which is why I would want to reach out to the parents to make sure that they're very clear on that and understand that. So needing the items, the desks, and the plexiglass, needing the gym cleared out, and then checking with the second grade parents. Those would be some of the barriers that would need to get solved before we could have all of our students back. Does anyone have questions? Yes, Richard.
So you don't have a date?
I don't have a date.
Other questions for Linus? Do you, since I assume, I'm going to make an assumption that the date part is contingent upon receiving some of the desks and those things, is that accurate, or is that?
That is accurate.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep, thank
Any
you.
other questions? All good, thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. As has been noted previously by my esteemed colleagues here, each school has been exploring our options around increased in-person instructional time for our students, supporting their academic and social emotional well-being. We realize that students, families, and staff members have been living through the long-reaching effects of this pandemic for over a year now. And this is challenging work. To say challenging feels like a pretty significant understatement. The plan that I'm about to present is a culmination of, I won't say countless, but dozens and dozens of hours of work with our administrative team, the parents who've taken the time to provide some feedback, our school leadership team, office staff, all of our specialists, our school counselors, school nurse, classroom teachers, support staff, food service, and custodial staff. I tried to make it a short list, but I couldn't find anybody to cut off. Frankly, it's taken a lot. So our starting point was to answer this question: would it be possible to have 100% of our students return to in-person instruction at Green Central School? We then went to work looking at the logistics around spacing, the design of our school, staffing, time available during the school day, instructional time, eating, movement, CDC, DOE requirements, etc., around the feasibility of this plan. And of course, these factors at different locations can and do yield different results. We considered these numerous factors and their impact on our plans at GCS, which has the unique combination of the widest range of student ages and the second largest student body in our district. We came to the realization that the required distancing does prevent us from bringing all of our students back to in-person instruction. There is no viable option at this time. Certain factors around spacing, time, and the ability to eat are too impactful to make a 100% return a viable option. Therefore, we are proposing the following. We believe that we can accommodate all students who are currently participating in the hybrid model in grades 4 through 6, have them come back to school for 4 days per week, Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday, with homework assignments to complete on Wednesdays. In addition, we'd be able to accommodate a small number of targeted students in grades K through 3 to also attend those 4 days per week. The method to select these students is still being developed, but will include specific criteria related to learning growth. The rest of our students would continue with our current hybrid model. While we're optimistic about this proposal, there are still challenges that accompany the implementation. The most significant challenges have been around distancing and meals. To accommodate current spacing requirement, breakfasts that used to be eaten in the classroom now need to be eaten in the gym. Due to the success of our meal program, GCS will now require 2 waves of breakfasts to provide our students with nutrition to start their learning day. As an aside and as an example, providing breakfast for all GCS students would require currently 4 waves of breakfast. With sanitizing in between, the final wave of breakfast would end sometime just prior to 11 a.m., just in time for lunch to start. So we're not even considering additional staff that would be required to make this happen. So such impact of having all students present full-time would seriously reduce instructional time for students as well. So this evening's proposal may also impact approximately 45 of our families who have students in grades 4 to 6 and also have siblings in other grade levels that would not be coming back full-time. We regrettably acknowledge that there may likely be some challenges around childcare for our younger siblings who are not able to come back to GCS full-time right now. Another seemingly minor issue that is not minor to our growing students is eating snacks. Currently, we have no plan other than taking the kids outdoors to eat snacks due to distancing requirements without masks. Now, when would we like to implement this plan? Ideally, last October. This past January at the latest. But as we've come to realize, and we said this to the GCS staff, COVID-19 doesn't care about our ideal timeline, unfortunately, and the science certainly wasn't available to allow for that. But we do propose implementing the plan as soon as it's practicable once additional needed furniture arrives and is distributed. So if this is done by April 26th, we'd like to have our students in grades 4, 5, and 6 transition to their full classrooms starting on that date. GCS has committed and caring staff members who want to provide the best education possible for every one of our students. We acknowledge and appreciate the difficulty that our COVID planning throughout this pandemic has created for our students, family, and yes, our staff. While we are optimistic about this proposal, there are still changes and challenges that accompany its implementation, including for transportation. But we are committed to do what's best for our students through a plan that's realistic, sustainable, and safe. We believe that our current proposal can meet those criteria and will also give us an opportunity to practice for what the fall may or may not have in store for us. So, thank you. Questions?
Questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, Danielle Harris, principal at Leeds Central School. I'm proposing returning all students in grades K to 6 at Leeds Central School to in-person instruction 4 days a week, Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday, starting after April vacation. This schedule will increase the amount of time students are in school, while at the same time allowing staff members time on Wednesdays for the planning and preparation that will be needed as we move forward with this new model. Under our current schedule, we have some students fully remote, some in-person 2 days per week, and others in person 4 days per week. In order for this proposal to work, students who are currently fully remote will need to continue fully remote instruction, and the teacher instruction for those students will continue to be offered 2 days a week. All students who are currently scheduled either 2 or 4 days in person will be scheduled for the 4 days of in-person instruction, and there will be no option for in-person just 2 days a week. We need our teachers to have a clear and consistent class roster, so these parameters will allow for more efficient and effective instructional planning. Doing this is not as simple as some would imagine. Some of the remote students will need to change from one cohort to another. One teacher will need to teach a group of students she doesn't know at a grade level she has never taught. Some of our in-person students will have to move to a different teacher. Some students will have a substitute teacher 2 days a week. Our buses will be filled to capacity, so students who are dropped off and picked up by their parents will need to continue to be driven to and from school rather than riding the bus. This is not going to be simple or without some significant stress to the people involved. Consistent class rosters are also required in order to plan for the arrangement of classroom furniture. We have to reset classrooms to have desks 3 feet apart instead of the current 6 feet, and then add additional desks to these spaces. Our students have been eating lunches in their classroom this year, but the students need to be 6 feet apart when eating, so that poses a challenge. We will be taking them outdoors to eat whenever weather permits, But we must have a plan for cold or rainy days, and we are currently working on exactly what that will look like. Our gym/cafeteria, since we only have one, is being used as a classroom this year, so there's only a small section that will be available for just one of the largest classes to eat in there during one of the lunches. When students in grades 4 through 6 are eating lunches, some students will need to be sitting in the hallway in order for everyone to be able to spread out 6 feet apart. We can provide desks, chairs, and/or lap trays for the children to use while eating their lunch. Breakfast and snacks are also consumed in the classroom, and making sure that students are 6 feet apart while this happens will be challenging. As others have stated, this will be a substantial change for everyone, and our staff members have already been working so very hard this year to meet the needs of each of their students. Not knowing what will happen in the coming weeks is causing a great deal of stress for all involved. So I don't want to give the impression that it's going to be stress-free to make this happen, or that it's going to go off smoothly and easily. This change will require the substantial rearranging of schedules, as well as lots of time for academic planning and preparation. After students return, there will be a need to spend time reacquainting students with each other, the classroom, the new procedures, and academic expectations associated with the full classroom. We will continue to need to be ready to change plans at a moment's notice. Returning in-person students to 4 days a week, given our current structure, will require everyone in our community to support one another, the understanding of how hard this change will be, and forgiving in the times when it does not go smoothly.
Any questions for Dina? Jessica?
Not specifically Danielle, but to the full group. Do we have extra like custodial staff during this whole time? Who's putting together all the desks and plexiglass and, I just keep thinking, I just keep hearing every classroom's getting more.
Were you volunteering, Jessica?
If you need me.
So my additional desks that I ordered are on their way in a trailer truck already, so I'm not worried that the desks will show up in time. And I think there's 2 other schools that are supposed to be getting there soon, so it's kind of staggered as far as that goes.
It wasn't so much. Are you saying that? Go ahead.
My desks typically show up put together.
Oh.
So they come in, you have to order them in even numbers because they come in boxes stacked on top of each other in pairs. So they typically come put together. So that won't be a huge undertaking.
Yes, I think we have someone up in the back. If you
Hi,
could let us.
Jeannie Gedley. I'm a parent of students at Levitt as well as Green Central.
Thank you.
Just out of curiosity, I should start. I'm very thankful for all the work that's gone into the reentry plans. I'm just curious, what happened to all the desks from last year when our students were in school, when all of our students were in school?
So at Turner Primary School, our teachers don't use desks. They've sat at big, long, and round tables. And because of the distancing, you could only have one child at each of those, and they take up way too much space.
Okay.
So we had to order desks that our teachers, normally little kids, they don't sit at desks. So it's new, it's completely new. That's just at Turner Primary School.
And that's the same thing at Tripp. I have one classroom that was just large tables, and so since we can't use those, I think I only ordered a dozen desks so that room can have their desks.
And at Green, we are going to be using some of the desks that we've ordered for putting them in the gym, because we only have a finite number of tables that the kids can sit in, and we're like, we can't fit any more tables, but could we do individual desks? So we're even using them for the kids to eat on. Yeah, sure.
And one other quick question. The re-entry date contingent on the equipment, including the plexiglass, what is the plexiglass going to change? Because I haven't heard anybody say when the plexiglass shields are there, they can remain 3 feet with masks off, eating or anything like that. So what is contingent on the plexiglass arriving in order to start the re-entry?
Who wants to field that one on the plexiglass?
I didn't order any plexiglass, so that's on you guys.
So this wouldn't be the only one of the, but this is just an example. So in my school, similar to what others shared about the desk, we've been working the past 5 years because teachers really want tables for collaborative work, and then never expecting a pandemic. So now we're in the situation where we need desks. But we've carefully chosen them that they could be put together to make tables. Now, one of the things that the requirements are that students are seated 3 feet and they're facing one direction. So in order not to order more desks than we need in the future, some of our tables, our classrooms have like smaller round tables, and currently we have 1 student at each of those. And I can put 2 students at each of those and not have to bring in all brand new desks if I have a divider, because they would be facing each other with their mask on. And it's okay if they have the divider, but it isn't okay if there isn't the divider. So in order to be able to put those, that is just one example of why you need to have a divider in order to be able to do that.
Thank you.
I'm in need of, TES is in need of 50 of those additional plexiglass dividers, and we believe we'll be able to have those.
And at Tripp, they have special science tables that they use. They're 6 feet long, but to get enough students in, those large tables will need plexiglass on them because they would face each other. So it's that situation. It's a special desk that they use in the science labs for experiments, and I really can't get them other desks to use.
So at Turner Primary School, like we have an art room and we have a table, and if you have a plexiglass divider, and you can have more kids at the table. So because our class cohorts are bigger, more kids are going to be going to art than what we originally designed the art classroom for. So originally the art classroom might have been designed for 7 kids. Well, now we need to design it for 14. So by putting the plexiglass there, and the kids are 3 feet apart, you might be able to fit 2 at a table so that you can fit more kids in the art room. That's the same in our library as well.
Thank you.
Thanks for those explanations on that. Do we have other kind of general questions at this point that folks would be interested in asking? And as the superintendent indicated, that the board's not taking action this evening. We're just having an opportunity to hear where the plans are at right now. And then on the 8th, we'll have the opportunity to hear updates and go from there. Is that a question? Yes.
I'm going to assume that pre-K is going to stay, cohort A kids stay on cohort A and cohort B kids stay.
And Teresa, did you get a name, just so we keep?
Michelle Richardson from Toronto.
Excellent, thanks, Michelle.
So at Turner Primary School, the pre-K program has always been 2 days. It's just usually it's Monday, Wednesday, and Tuesday, Thursday. So the pre-K program will continue to stay Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday, Friday. Thank you.
And again, like someone else said earlier, we want to thank everybody that has put in effort. I'm a parent of kids that go to Turner School District, but I also own daycare here in Turner. So this will be very welcome change for the kids, and we'll do everything we can to continue to support them in making this transition as easy as possible, as well as our families and stuff. So we really appreciate that.
We appreciate our daycares have been amazing at supporting kids best they can with their remote. It's truly been a community effort to be able to make that.
And we'll continue to do whatever we need to, have to, can to support the kids and the families, because that's what ultimately we're here for. So if you say, you know what, school's closed the rest of the year, then we'll support that if we need to, because that's what we did last year. But sending them off to school before is very welcome news.
Yes, in the back, please.
Yeah, hi. I'm just curious as to why now.
And actually, can we get your name as well? Just
Robert Bowie.
Thank you.
I'm a resident of Turner. I also have a daughter in high school. 3 days ago, the head of the CDC Walensky just said, if we hurry this back, it could be dire. We just had a basketball game shut down the school and 2 local businesses for one basketball game.
And I'd like to add to this, on the day when my school had 8 cases, they sent out the plan to the teachers about the 4 days, as they just sent out the email that we had to close the school. And I also had a question, talking to a couple of my teachers last week, they said that they were only allowed to be teaching the same amount as they were in the 2 days. So you say that it's for in-person learning, but we're only allowed to be learning the same amount that we are in the 2 days that we're there. So the other 2 days would be either used for in-class study time or Kahoot. Like, I also did the math, and I'm also pretty bad at math, but it's only adding 12 days. All of this hard work, which I do appreciate, because there's a lot of detail in this that I couldn't even comprehend. But it's only, I'm a senior at 11, by the way, my name's Amelia. It's only added 12 days of in-person learning. So I really think it's just about trying it out for next year. And honestly, I just want graduation and prom. And I do miss, I miss half of my friends are on cohort B. But we've all come to the realization that we're not going to go to school together again. And we're okay with that. We honestly we want to have the things that we look forward to having together, and we just don't want to get shut down for prom and our last week of school for the sake of 12 days.
I mean, this young man in the middle just said 40 minutes ago, we are in the middle, paraphrasing here, in the long middle of a pandemic. So, we're in the middle here, and now we want to rush to push it to be in the end, especially when the head of the CDC, which is supposedly what we're supposed to be taking the marching orders from, just said 3 days ago. This could be dire. So, now my next question is, if you could answer, is this rush to the 26th contingent upon any federal money? Sending the kids back, is there any type of federal money involved in that? Why are we doing this so abruptly? That's it.
Kim, do you want to respond to some of that, or what's the easiest way?
Sure. Yes, so we are in a place where more staff are getting vaccinated. The governor's Moving Maine Forward plan is beginning to loosen restrictions and open things back up. So it used to be that for a long time now, we've had only 50 people could gather in any one space. And as Principal Shaw was saying, that made it really difficult to even be able to put kids together for lunch or breakfast, for example. Now we are at half capacity of any room. So for example, in this room, we could probably have, 150 people, Evan? Something like that?
Just a little, like 160, something like that.
160 people, right, so the capacity is opening way up. We continue to have data that shows that school environments are safer than those environments in the general public because we're paying attention to those mitigation measures, for example, that making sure that we're distancing and wearing the masks and the hand washing and doing the health assessments and all of those things. So we've having some good, hopeful signs happen right now. We did have cases lower. They might be climbing a little bit now, a little further.
14%.
Yeah.
The age group that we're talking about.
Yeah.
14%, and that's doing learning at home. So now we're going to have the variable of sending them all back to school. That 14% will become 28%, which is.
So I am going to ask that when someone's speaking, that we give them the courtesy to finish what they were speaking about. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So we also have information back from the survey from parents, and the vast majority of parents have been asking us all year, please do whatever you can do to provide some more in-person time for students, because that is what is working. That best supports student learning. It supports their social emotional well-being. There have been concerns about mental health issues with so many children home many days a week. So we felt that this would be the time to see what can we do. And when the national CDC recently changed the 6 feet to the 3 feet for schools, we began to look and see what could we do? What would be possible for us to support our students further? And so, as you heard, we can't get all students back in all schools because there isn't enough space to implement the distancing with all students. But in some of the schools, we could do that and still keep the space. We have actually, the furniture we moved out of classrooms that we've been storing, we now have storage containers so we can move that out. So we're trying to make sure that any cafeterias and gyms are open because students have to eat and they have to be 6 feet apart, so larger spaces to spread out. So we're looking for every way that we can to support students. And 12 additional days doesn't feel like a lot, but it's over 2 weeks for kids on a normal year. And we feel like any additional increased time would be good for students.
Thank you. Other questions folks might have at this time? Yes.
Justin Kassan. When will there be a final decision on this
We're going to take this next week to continue working with our parents and with our transportation department because there are barriers there, and we have to make sure that we have enough parents who can continue to drive and to pick up, as well as the little bit of space that we do have on buses. We have to make that work. As I said in the beginning, if we can't make that work, we have to go back to the drawing board, right? Because we're going to have to make sure that we can get as many students here as we can, but they have to have their transportation. The other piece of that, and Danielle, Principal Dr. Harris just said this, that we have 3 schools that those materials that we've ordered through the federal emergency relief funding, by the way, 3 schools worth of furniture is on its way to us now, but we don't yet have a date for the materials for the other 3 schools. And we have to have those things in order to make the plans that you heard tonight work. So next week we will know more about transportation, and hopefully we will know more about when we're going to have the desks and the plexiglass dividers and the seats in as well. Recognizing that this is in progress, so we hope to be pretty close to finalized on the 8th, but if we don't have all the information, we won't quite be there.
I mean, there can be a vote on it contingent that the material arrives to the schools.
I'm sorry, one more time?
Can there still be a vote contingent that the materials will arrive to the schools so that parents will know what the consensus is?
So the hope that we have is that this would begin after April vacation on the 26th. That's the hope that we have. So when you say a vote, are you talking to the board about a vote?
Yes, the approval.
Oh, okay. Okay. So next week on the 8th, that's when I plan to ask the board to consider taking action to approve what we have in mind.
Great, thank you.
Certainly.
Other questions, either from board members or other folks that are with us here this evening? Yes.
Jeff Murray. I guess I have 2 questions. One being the date that floated around 26. Again, like so many others. First, thank you to everyone who is, all the teachers, the principals, the staff, and all of them. This year has been challenging for everyone, for parents, for childcare, and everyone has really stepped up and done everything they can, and I want to thank them profusely for all their efforts and all their hard work and dedication. Thrown out as the potential, this is we'll go for launch at maximum capacity for whatever the spaces provide. Having the high school just get out of their quarantine for a week, and this is not coming off a break. I guess my concern is there any thought to, everyone is stir crazy, people are going to go out, being as safe as they can. Every gathering, every large holiday group has had a large spike after that within the first 10 days to 2 weeks. Thanksgiving, Christmas, New Year's, March, spring break, we're already seeing from the colleges that have gone down in March. I'm concerned that if we have all the parents or kids or families that even if it's just, I'm going to go see aunt or uncle or grandparents who have had the vaccine, they still might be coming back, and now you're going to have all that potential exposure, and you're going to double the size and half the distance of the students. Is there a, well, we're going to try this, but if we get to May, whatever 2 weeks from the 26th is May 10th, and we have major outbreaks in all schools, we're gonna go right back to remote. Or, you know, we're gonna push through, even though all the schools in the district are closed the next 10 days, we're gonna try to get them to come back and just hope that that's, I just didn't, is that on anybody's radar?
Absolutely, it's on our radar. It's been on our radar all year long. And as Principal Shaw had mentioned earlier, the standard operating procedures that are put out for schools, well, for all of us, those have been revised so that we can consider, for example, assigned seating in some of the larger areas, so it won't mean a massive quarantine in every single case. So what we've been working under has meant, you know, if your class, you're all out. To some degree, that could still happen. If you're in the gym, you're all out, you're all quarantined. But with the new revised standard operating procedures, we will have the ability to have some control with our assigned seating that will say, okay, the cafeteria has 70 students in it, or 60 or 70 students in it, but only this number of students was really around the same area of the child who was positive, who was sitting right here. So it will help us to narrow that down a little bit. And all year, I know when we began in the fall, I was very concerned. I didn't think that we would be able to continue in-person learning. And after Thanksgiving break, I was sure that we would not be able to continue in person. And after Christmas and all the other holidays, I was pretty sure. But we've done pretty well. We have had a few times when individual schools have had to go fully remote for a period of time, but it hasn't been a lot. And it's actually been pretty good compared to several of our area schools. That doesn't mean things can't change, but we know that because we're all wearing masks and because we're keeping that distance consistently, that we have the best chance of keeping all of us as healthy as possible.
I appreciate that, thank you. I know that the survey went out, and I'm very glad that there was such a large response. The results from the last summer, going into the fall, when we were trying to figure out 3 days a week, 2 days a week, cohorts, I felt like the results from those were more transparent than this one. So I hear there's a lot that's out there. We've had a lot of this. The only question is, everyone I have talked to does not want to do this. Now that, again, I'm very aware that there's a small group and it's a small percentage of what's there. I'm saying that as a parent that my kids need to go. Routine is about everything, and having my young kids in the classroom 4 days a week is way better than me trying to not be frustrated at home trying to get my second grader to learn. So I would love them there, but I also want to make sure that everything is thought out, and it isn't, well, we've talked to a couple of people, and it's sort of 50-50, but one group really wants it or is louder than another group, or all of with the traffic. I know the traffic and the transportation has been a big, it's always been run up as a hurdle. But in what respect? To what extent? I know all the buses that pick up our kids last year, it was 2 to a seat, the full bus. So if we're at 1 to a seat, I don't know how we're going to get everyone on the buses without having a larger percentage of parents, at least in the Turner area, maybe bus their kids. And if you're looking at having a whole nother road that gets shut down for 45 minutes or so, is there any thought you need to have traffic? Do you need to have any of the other than paddles to allow people to move in? That's an awful lot of cars in a small space, because none of the roads have a lot of shoulder in that area. So it's always a challenge to get anything there. I know Mr. Petrie and the whole group at TPS do an amazing job getting the kids for all of their concerts, but it's always a challenge finding enough parking, even when you stagger the starts for everything. So when you bring them all back, and we're asking a lot of parents to drop their kids off and pick them up. Same thing with all of the other schools. The more smoothly we can plan, how do you get that? Is it all of this one and then all of that one? You open it? Because none of them have great spots. I know that there's a new road for Tripp in some of the other schools, but anything that you would, knowing that all the buses have to go through before any of the other pickups happen, so those lines only get really long fast.
So, is it okay if I respond, Betsy? So going back to the first part of your statements about the surveys last year. So we did a similar thing last year. We asked, first of all, what were experiences in the spring? What is it that people are hoping for? Who can transport? Who would take advantage of food service? And then we started looking at different models, and then we said which of these models would work, because there were several that could work. The proposals we made tonight are really, we don't have a bunch of choices. We're trying to do what we can do with the space that we have. So we do need to reach out to families more about the transportation piece. That is potentially a huge barrier for us, as is the traffic that will be lined up to schools as well. So that's why we need another week to be looking at all this and figuring out what makes sense and figuring out if we will be able to pull off the transportation or not.
I appreciate that. Thank you. I understand. It was the word where it was furniture, but they were very specific. We need the desks for this, we need this for this, we need 12, or we need whatever the number was. It was a specific, rather than just a vague. Transportation is a problem. I understand that that's a multifaceted issue, and that there's still a lot of back and forth to even have a starting point. But if for example, Turner, since that's the town that I live in, and my kids live, if we're already at 90% of the bus capacity, and we're only having one cohort, are we at that? Is it where are we much less than that, where we can probably get 3/4 of the students on the buses without that problem? It seems like a monumental, or like a non-starter. If we can't get them here, we can't have them 4 days a week. And I just don't know how big a hurdle that is, because it's just been labeled transportation. Again, understanding that a lot of that depends on how many parents or siblings or whatever are able to get their kids to and from the schools. It just seems like a vague description of a very large hurdle that may or may not have an easy solution, and I just don't know where to go with plans.
Other questions? Yes. Ms. Hershey.
Want me to answer some of those questions?
Kim, are you at the point where you want to delve into more detail on the transportation, or is there still quite a bit that needs to be figured out there?
Yes, so Transportation Supervisor Hersey, thank you so much for being willing. What I'm hoping for is that we'll be spending some time together and then be able to put out the plan to everybody once we've had a chance to do a little bit more work on that. Yeah, let's wait until we get a chance to do some more planning. Thank you.
Because you're hit the nail on the head. It's huge, obviously, and that doesn't, I mean, I probably have to take my shoes off to do the math, but still, I mean, if we're looking at 22 or 23 kids on a bus versus as many of the little darlings as we can stuff in there, I mean, I didn't really mean that the way it came out, but anyways, absolutely, that's not higher level math to figure out that that's a huge barrier. However, we've seen everybody leverage a huge amount of creativity so far, and we've had families and caregivers that have been tremendously flexible in finding solutions. So I would say stay tuned on that, because there's still a tremendous amount of work to do on it that I'm sure Lori is pretty well immersed in right at this moment. So we'll stay tuned on that component. Yes. Amelia, is it?
Yes. So, like he said, I do believe that there is a loud majority. As my parents and a lot of my peers' parents don't have as big of an impact, and it won't change their lives as much, because we all have our life now, and we can all get here for all 4 days, and they're going to be at work. So what does it change for them? The only reason that my parents are here are because they're here for how I feel about returning to school for 4 days a week. And I'm sure that if more parents knew about this, which they should, but they don't, they'd be here with their kids as well. Because our whole school respects Shaw so much. We all love him as our principal. But if he sent out a survey to the students about mental health and how returning to 4 days would affect our lives and how we feel in our headspace right now, I think that it would scare everyone into rethinking this decision. And I also just want an answer about if we're allowed to talk more than what we are now, along with everyone.
can answer it.
Yeah, if you could, please, Evan, thank you.
Amelia, I think the number one priority when we come back is going to be definitely to reestablish connections that have been lost. Can we stand up?
Use the microphone.
Yep. So the number one priority when we come back will be to reestablish connections that we've lost, because they've been strained at best for the last, I would say, 13 months. So we're going to have to take some time to redo that, or rebuild those connections and provide support for students who have been struggling, because the feedback has been overwhelming on my end from parents and students that they have been struggling with the current schedule and only being here 2 days a week, and that they need some additional support. So, as I mentioned, our number one priority would be to establish that and do that under the idea that maintaining our current pace academically. After we establish those relationships and get our feet back underneath us again, it's very likely that we will pick up the pace a little bit, but that's not going to be our number one priority when we come back. It's going to be to work with kids who need it both socially and academically. I'll call on you, go ahead.
Okay, I appreciate you being honest with that, and I just worry that we're going through all this for 12 days, and like, I know everyone, including the primary school and elementary school and middle school, this like group of kids has been used as like test dummies, not on purpose. All the teachers are going through it just as much as we are, but with only adding 12 days to our 60 days of school left, like, I just don't understand why we do it.
So,
I understand that the younger kids, they're being stunted by this, they're not seeing their teachers as much, not seeing their peers as much, I just don't know why we're going to be so heavily affected also.
So I'm going to stand here very casually like this, and I'm going to say to you that this is the same conversation that I had with somebody else earlier today. And had I been able to organize a schedule so that we could have done this in August and had 175 days of this, then I would have. My option to do this became available last Friday. So since last Friday, this becomes an option for us. And I'm going to take advantage of every opportunity I have to get as many kids in this building as I can for as long as I can get them. And I know that it's a pain, and I know it's going to be a struggle, but I know that it's also going to be worth it, because the time that's been spent outside of the building has not been as productive as any of us would have hoped, and I think it's caused a great deal of struggle for a lot of people. So if I can gain 1 day, or if I can gain 12 days, I'm going to gain as many as I can. Thank you. Anything? Yes, Michelle.
If a student is remote, if a student is in Homework A and their family doesn't want to go to 4 days, can they revert back to fully remote for the remainder of the school year? Or is it, I'm assuming it's an all or nothing, like I have 2 kids in the district. I have one that goes 2 days a week, and I have one that's full remote, and he's a high school student, so I would love the opportunity for him to go to school 4 days, but we opted to do remote, we talked about it as a family, and that's what we'll continue to do, because I'm not going to request to take that slot away from another child who's been in school. But if there's children that are remote 2 days a week, and don't want to go to the 4 days that they're in school, can they revert backwards and go remote the remainder of the school year? And I don't need an answer right now, I'm just wondering.
Another question to throw into the mix of.
Right, something, for the families that 2 days is working and if 2 days are not an option, is it an all or nothing?
Thank you. Other questions for folks to consider this evening? Yuri.
I know you mentioned that the response to the surveys was pretty overwhelming with folks wanting. Is it 10% of people didn't want people to come back, or was it 40, 60? I'm just curious, of the responses we got, what's the real?
So I don't have, I don't have it in front of me right now, Yuri, but it was the vast majority, and we can certainly get that for next week.
it's worth considering as we continue the conversation.
Anything else for questions? And, yes, Olivia.
I just kind of want to say something. This is kind of toward the students, especially at Levitt. I know it can be kind of difficult to process. I know that my viewpoints changed a lot over the last week. Personally, I'm a really independent learner, and I can teach myself a lot of things with little in-person instruction. But I know that that's a high school that their students are just opting to not do their work or not to show up to their classes, and that really shouldn't be an option, and that education is so important, whether we feel necessarily motivated to do it or not. I know that there's a lot of extenuating circumstances regarding that, with that family, with mental health and all of that, and I absolutely understand that, but just coming from my perspective, especially as a senior, I kind of see where you're coming from, Emmy, and I've heard that from a lot of other people in our grade, and juniors and sophomores and freshmen too. I just think that there's a bigger picture that we just need to, for students especially. I know seniors, it does seem, well, we're just going back 12 days a week and we're just going to graduate and it's not going to mean anything, but there's so many other students in the district that it's going to have an immense positive effect on going back to school. And I just want to say that coming from the student perspective, it may be hard to understand based on your personal circumstances, but we've all sacrificed a lot during this time, and I'm sure we're all going to have to continue doing the same going forward, and that's just one of the things that comes with these changes.
Thank you. And thanks for your candor, Olivia. I think that's really helpful for the board as well, and Amelia as well. It's definitely good to hear the student perspective as well. Yes?
Along with the student perspective, would it hurt to send out 2 more surveys to the parents and the students? Like, the students won't have an actual say, but at least you would know how we actually feel. Like, including all of the students that struggle at school, their voice would be heard, and then we wouldn't just be speaking for them.
Thank you. Any other questions for tonight? And certainly, obviously, there's a lot more conversations going on this, and we'll be discussing again on the 8th. So if you're like me and you leave the meeting tonight and you think of something that you had as a question, please don't hesitate to send that along either to myself or to Superintendent Brandt, because it is certainly important to have feedback from folks. Yes, sir.
Yes. Just one more point. This Sunday is Easter, Mother's Day coming right up shortly after that. Large gatherings. This young man just mentioned that. And I agree. I think kids should be back at school. But I'm just worried about the cost. Not monetary cost, but the cost to the rise in cases in the age group in which we're speaking about. Has that been discussed? So if we go April 26th, cases start rising, what is the plan to regress back to? Can that be switched back that easily? Or is that another cumbersome task to undertake once you've already gone full the other way? Does that make any sense?
Oh, it makes lots of sense, and I think probably everyone in this room and everyone watching at home is concerned about that, or I hope they are anyways. I think absolutely, to see cases rising, certainly to see positive cases in the schools is, I think, probably everybody's greater fears at the moment. So I do think that our schools have all responded as close to on a dime as they possibly can when we have positive cases, when we have implications around whether there's school staff in quarantine that means we have to shut a school down for a period of time, or if there are cases enough that we have to shut a school down for a period of time. So I certainly wouldn't anticipate, unless somebody tells me differently, that those sort of ability to respond or plans to respond if something changes would be any different in this scenario than it is today. We have to, the virus isn't going away just because we're all sick of it. I mean, it's not sick of us enough yet to leave, so we still have to have responses in place. Is that, would you folks anticipate anything different as far as our need to respond as circumstances arise?
So I think this entire year we have been responding very quickly. And when I think about Evan had just said, you know, as of Friday, we knew this could be an option, right? So quickly learning what we can do and putting that out there. We have been in the hybrid model this year, so we do know how to do that. So it's creating something brand new, I think, that is taking a little bit more time in the planning. But we do know how to do the 2-day-a-week hybrid model. So if your question is, would we consider going back to that? I feel like we have to see what happens, and if it warrants a change, then we will move forward to make another change. I'm hoping not, but as with everything else in the pandemic, it's really hard to predict what will happen, so we're going forward with our best thinking about it to keep everybody safe, and we will respond as we need to.
Thank you. I would just say stay tuned, and as I indicated, if folks think of other questions or concerns, certainly board members or other folks, don't hesitate to send those along as we work on figuring out the other wrinkles in this whole process. But thanks to everyone for all the work that's gone into this. Obviously, there are so many different moving parts that, it makes my head hurt, and all the work that's gone into that, and certainly admirable, and isn't as if the work stops after you've presented lovely plans to us this evening. I think probably even more work begins, so thanks in advance for that work as well. But it is good to know that we don't have to do a lot of desk assembly, because that's a relief. So that brings us to item 10.2, second reading and adoption of revised policy IHBG, homeschooling.
So moved. Second.
Carlos and Richard, discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Unanimous. 10.3, second reading and adoption of a revised policy IHBGA, homeschooling, participation in school programs.
So moved. Second.
And that was Carlos and Richard again. Discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Unanimous. 10.4, second reading and adoption of revised policy JLDBG, reintegration of students from juvenile correctional facilities.
So moved. Second.
Carlos and Richard. Discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Unanimous. 10.5, second reading and adoption of revised policy JRA, student education records and information, regulation JRAR, and exhibit JRAB.
So moved. Second.
Carlos and Richard. Discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Unanimous. With our adjustments, that brings us to the only other item on our agenda being an executive session to discuss AFSCME negotiations. Do we have any other items of business that we need to take up prior to that? Well, we still have, I was going to say, well, we still have an audience. We have a little bit less audience, but the thought still counts. If there's nothing else that we need to take up, I would entertain a motion for 10.8, and that is an executive session to discuss AFSCME negotiations pursuant to 1 MRSA 4056D.
So moved. Second.
Carlos and Richard, all those in favor?